Hey, we are in First Chronicles. We're going to do chapters 13, 14, and 15 today because none of them are super long. So let's go ahead and get uh, into this. Chapter 13. David conferred with each of his officers, the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. He then said to the whole assembly of Israel, "If it seems good to you, and if it is the will of the Lord our God, let us send word far and wide to the rest of our people throughout the territories of Israel, and also to the priests and Levites who are with them to in their towns and pasture lands, to come and join us. Let us bring the ark of our God back to us, for we did not inquire of it during the reign of Saul." The whole assembly agreed to do this because it seemed right to the people. So David assembled all Israel, from the Shahor River in Egypt to Lebo Hamath, to bring the ark of God from Kiriath Jearim. David and all Israel went to Bala of Judah, Kiriath Jearim, to bring up from there the ark of God, the Lord, who is enthroned between the cherubim, the ark that is called by the name. They moved the ark of God from Abinadab's house on a new cart with Uzzah and Ahio guiding it. David and all the Israelites were celebrating with all their might before God with songs and with harps and lyres and timbrels and cymbals and trumpets. When they came to the threshing floor of Chidon, Uzzah reached out his hand to steady the ark because the oxen had stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and he struck him down because he had put his hand on the ark, so he died there before God. Then David was angry because of the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzzah. David was afraid of God that day and asked, "How can I ever bring the ark of God to me?" He did not take the ark to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of God remained with the family of Obed-Edom in his house for 3 months, and the Lord blessed his household and everything he had. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David along with the cedar logs, stonemasons, and carpenters to build a palace for him. And David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that his kingdom had been highly exalted for the sake of his people Israel. In Jerusalem, David took more wives and became the father of more sons and daughters. These are the names of the children born to him there: Shemua, Shabab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Eliphelet, Noga, Nepheg, Japhiah, Elishama, Belayada, and Eliphet. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over all Israel, they went up in full force to search for him. But David heard about it, and he went out to meet them. Now the Philistines had come and raided the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of God, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" And the Lord answered him, "Go, I will deliver them into your hands." So David and his men went up to Baal Perazim, and there he defeated them. He said, "As waters break out, God has broken out against my enemies by my hand." So that place was called Baal Perazim. The Philistines had abandoned their gods there, and David gave orders to burn them in the fire. Once more the Philistines raided the valley, so David inquired of God again, and God answered him, "Do not go directly after them, but circle around them and attack them in front of the poplar trees. As soon as you hear the sound of marching and the tops of the poplar trees, move out to battle, because that will mean God has gone out in front of you to strike the Philistine army." So David did as God commanded, and they struck down the Philistine army all the way from Gibeon to Gezer. So David's fame spread throughout every land, and the Lord made all the nations fear him. After David had constructed buildings for himself in the city of David, he prepared a place for the ark of God and pitched a tent for it. Then David said, "No one but the Levites may carry the ark of God, because the Lord chose them to carry the ark of the Lord and to minister before him forever." David assembled all Israel in Jerusalem to bring up the ark of God and to the place he had prepared for it. He called together the descendants of Aaron and the Levites. From the descendants of Kohath, Uriel was the leader of 120 relatives. From the descendants of Merari, Asaiah was the leader of 220 relatives. From the descendants of Gershon, Joel was the leader, and 130 relatives. From the descendants of Elizaphan, Shemaiah the leader, and 200 relatives. From the descendants of Hebron, Elil the leader, and 80 relatives. From the descendants of Uziel, Aminadab the leader, and 112 relatives. Then David summoned Zadok and Abiathar the priests, and Uriel, Asaiah, Joel, Shimei, Eliel, and Aminadab the Levites. He said to them, "You are the heads of the Levitical families. You and your fellow Levites are to consecrate yourselves and bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel, to the place I have prepared for it. It was because you, the Levites, did not bring it up the first time that the Lord our God broke out in anger against us. We did not inquire of him about how to do it in the prescribed way. So the priests and Levites consecrated themselves in order to bring up the ark of the Lord, the God of Israel. And the Levites carried the ark of God with the poles on their shoulders, as Moses had commanded, in accordance with the word of the Lord." David told the leaders of the Levites to appoint their fellow Levites as musicians to make a joyful sound with musical instruments, lyres, harps, and cymbals. So the Levites appointed Heman, son of Joel, from his relatives, Asaph, son of Berechiah, and from their relatives, the Merarites, Ethan, son of Cushiah, and with them their relatives next in rank, Zechariah, Jaziel, Shemarath, Jehiel, Uni, Eliab, Benaiah, Messiah, Mattathiah, Eliphalu, Mechaniah, Obed-Edom, and Jeiel, the gatekeepers. The musicians, Heman, Asaph, and Ethan, were to sound the bronze cymbals. Zechariah, Jaziel, Shemaramoth, Jehiel, Uni, Eliab, Messiah, and Benaiah were to play the lyres according to Alamoth, and Mattathiah, Eliphaleu, Mechaniah, Obed-Edom, Jeiel, and Azaziah were to play the harps, directing according to Sheminith. Kenaniah, the head Levite, was in charge of the singing. That was his responsibility because he was skillful at it. Berechiah and Elkanah were to be doorkeepers for the ark. Shebaniah, Joshaphat, Nathanael, Amasai, Zechariah, Benai, and Eleazar, the priests, were to blow trumpets before the ark of God. Obed-Edom and Jehiah were also to be doorkeepers of the ark. So David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of units of thousands went to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with rejoicing. Because God had helped the Levites who were carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord, 7 bulls and 7 rams were sacrificed. Now David was clothed in robe of fine linen, as were all the Levites who were carrying the ark, as were the musicians in Kenaniah, who was in charge of the singing of the choirs. David also wore a linen ephod. So all Israel brought up the ark of the covenant of the Lord with shouts, with the sounding of ram's horns and trumpets and of cymbals and the playing of lyres and harps. As the ark of the covenant of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David dancing and celebrating, she despised him in her heart. I'll show you a picture of, this is from Domenico Garguillo, an Italian painter from the 1600s, just his rendition of the ark coming in to the city of Jerusalem and all of the excitement that was taking place. So there's a couple of things just as a reminder. The ark, it wasn't big. It was just a 2 foot by 2 foot, little over that, box. In that box was the 10 Commandments, the law of Moses. There was a jar of manna that was preserved from their days of traveling in those 40 years, and also the rod of Aaron that he used. It turned into a snake at one point and a blossom at another point, but that Aaron's rod was in there. The whole ordeal over this ark is that it was supposed to only be carried by priests. And here we see them, even though they built a new cart to be able to carry the ark. It wasn't the rule. It wasn't what God had said to do. And so they left it with Obed-Edom. He was a Levite from the Kohath tribe. I mean, so they started doing everything right, and they carried it correctly when they finally brought it into the city. David makes his own tent. The tent that Moses used all those years is still at Gibeon. We're going to find out about that in our next chapter. And so it really is important for us to follow the guidelines that God has set for us and not make up our own or not think that we've got a better way of doing it. God knows what's best. Have a great day.